It's common knowledge that being a Sith Lord predisposes one to cruelty. Meditating day and night on hatred, suffering, and conquest doesn't exactly translate to having a pleasant disposition. Most Sith believe they are superior beings to all others, and did not bother treating those lesser with any dignity. However, this stereotype did have its limits. Just like how the usually stoic and serene Jedi had their impatient outliers, there were some Sith who chose kindness and tolerance instead of vitriol. In today's Holocron, we're going to talk about some of the nicest Sith Lords in Star Wars history. Now, it should be known that we are not necessarily covering those that turned to the light or did overtly good deeds. The bar for what constitutes as a nice Sith is indescribably low. Some of them were still straight out evil, but chose to be respectable in the process. That's a very low bar. However, we have found something that is not as respectable. Some of you who are watching have not yet subscribed. If you want more lists like this one, or just want up-to-date information on all things Star Wars Legends, then force crush that subscribe button and become a lore junkie today. Now, my friends, let's begin. Several on our list actually lived during the same time period and knew one another personally, but let's begin in order, starting with Darth Thanaton. Before he took that title, he was known as Teneb Kel, apprentice to Lord Caliphо during the early days of the Great Galactic War. We learn much of his story in the Blood of the Empire comics. There, we meet a young acolyte who was left without a master when Lord Calipho tried to seize power for himself. He was thusly and severely punished by the Dark Council. Teneb Kel, although an apprentice at the time, had gained a deep respect for Sith history. He cared about preserving the statues and holocrons that the Jedi were attempting to tear down and to desecrate, and he brought down his fury on those that defaced ancient statues, citing the hundreds of slave lives that went into crafting them. This is what set him apart from the other Sith, the way that he dealt with the slave population. Following him around was an alien servant who went by the name of Maggot. Slavery was a normality in the Sith Empire of this time, especially for non-human races. We aren't told exactly how Teneb Kel came by having Maggot as his own servant, but they seem to be bonded with each other nonetheless. And throughout the comic, Teneb Kel goes far out of his way to ensure that Maggot is not mistreated and is well taken care of. Their relationship looks less like a master and a servant dynamic and more like Han and Chewie. Teneb Kel makes a point to locate Maggot after a large-scale battle, ensuring that he isn't too harmed. When in the Sith capital of Droman Kos, Kel was summoned to the chambers of the Dark Council directly. Before he ventures in, he gets in the face of one of the Emperor's royal guards, demanding that no one mistreat Maggot while he's gone. If anything happened, he threatened his wrath upon them. This was a bold statement simply because most Sith feared Vitiate's guard. They drew their power directly from the Emperor and were capable of stopping even members of the Dark Council. But the Sith apprentice Teneb Kel stood up to them on behalf of his friend. That was exactly how he treated Maggot. In every mission, he put his servant's safety first and spoke to him as an equal. While on the Hutt-owned medical satellite, he noticed Maggot watching over the other non-humans dancing, gambling, and having fun. To reward him for his faithful service, Teneb Kel encouraged him to go and to have fun with the rest. He trusted that his friend would be there when he needed him, and on one occasion, he outright stated that he did not think of Maggot as a slave or as a pet, but as a companion. Teneb Kel soon went on a death-defying mission, not sure whether he would live or die. But before he departed, he told his friend that if he were to die, he wanted Maggot to run, to go back to his people and his homeworld, and to have freedom. That was the Sith Lord's dying wish. But as nice to his slave as Teneb Kel was, he was still Sith. He worked alongside a Jedi Master only to kill his Padawan immediately following. He had been sent to find the Emperor's rogue apprentice who was giving information to the Jedi. Since it was a top secret Imperial matter, Kel wanted to keep the nature of the mission as secret as possible, even from his close friend. But during the climactic confrontation with the Emperor's apprentice, the woman proved too powerful for Teneb Kel. Maggot interfered, shooting at her with his rifle. This allowed Kel to gain the upper hand and destroy her. But before she died, she had revealed crucial information about the Emperor's sinister plans. He planned on hollowing people out and creating an army of his children in order to spread his mind all across the stars, like a virus. Unfortunately, Maggot heard of this plan as well, and as Kel led his injured friend out to safety, the Sith Lord betrayed and murdered his friend there. It was an emotional moment and one that he deeply apologized for, but he would go on to use the information about Vitiate to leverage his way into the Dark Council, taking the name of Darth Thanaton. Later in his life, Darth Thanaton would gain a rival, who happens to be the next person on our list of kind Sith Lords, Lord Zash. She stands distinctly because of her incredibly peppy and bubbly attitude. Unlike many Sith Lords, especially those found on Korriban, she had a smile, a cheerful attitude, and was always lavishing others with compliments. When she took an apprentice, she was always very encouraging to them, which was the opposite to what Sith training usually looked like. Lord Zash often heaped praise on those for jobs well done, and generously showered them with gifts and riches. Her disposition often disarmed younger acolytes, and made them trust her. But to the other Dark Lords, she was anything but trustworthy. Not a single one of the other Sith trusted Zash in the slightest. Her bright and charming attitude caused them to go full alert mode around her anytime she was near. This turned out to be the correct instinct, as Lord Zash was a cunning and a convincing shrew who used her apprentice to rid herself of a rival. This eventually elevated her to the position of Darth. She continued then using her apprentice's unique gifts to acquire special artifacts. These would allow her to conduct a ritual that would transfer her spirit into the body of her new student. All of her kindness was simply fattening the calf for the slaughter. She had been using Sith alchemy to keep herself looking young and vibrant, but when her body began breaking down because of it, she saw a new vessel. Luckily for her apprentice, their Dashade assassin stepped in the way of the ritual. The Dashade had never trusted Zash since the beginning, and often referred to her as a witch. As a show of devotion to the apprentice, the Dashade protected her from the blood-snatching spell. As a result, Zash was trapped inside of the Dashade's body, being forced to share it with her own spirit. Her bubbly attitude was henceforth much less so, but in order to bargain for a way out of the Dashade's body, she would begrudgingly continue to help the apprentice along their path to power. These instances proved that if a Sith is ever nice, it's usually because they want something from you. But it was not this way with Lord Kasim. In the days leading up to 1000 BBY, in a brand new era, the Brotherhood of Darkness was the ruling Sith faction. Their leader, Lord Khan, had brought all the feuding Dark Lords together under a single banner, a banner that considered them all to be equals. In this new regime, there was an academy on Korriban specifically meant to train those with potential of becoming Sith Lords. Kasim was the Blade Master of this academy, and the prime duelist of not only the Sith, but the entire era. Kasim would end up becoming the Blade Master who would teach Darth Bane. Before Bane took the title of Darth, he was a student. In this day, the Sith were not trained under specific masters, but went around in classes, learning through group lessons. It was Kasim that taught them the blade, and would often have the students enter dangerous sparring sessions with one another. Bane once suffered a humiliating loss to another student by the name of Sirak, and thereafter lost both prestige and power. No one after this wanted to interact with him. The masters of the academy thought him as worthless and refused to teach him. It got so bad that Bane began having trouble tapping into the Force. He came crawling to Kasim and begged for his help to become strong again. None of the other masters would give Bane the time of day, and he needed another shot at Sirak. Kasim was not one for pity, but he did believe in Bane's raw potential. He would proceed to train him in secret, giving Bane private lessons away from the main class. Bane steadily grew in power and skill, both because of the Blade Master and his own personal studies. Kasim was a difficult teacher, expecting nothing less than perfection from his students. However, this paid off. Bane became the best duelist in the academy, better than all of the other Sith besides Kasim himself, even the other masters. In his rematch with Sirak, Bane mopped the floor with him and earned back all of his prestige and more. Once he was elevated to the title of Sith Lord, Kasim himself would visit him in the dead of night. As a congratulations for how far Bane had come, Kasim would give him a gift, the curved tilt lightsaber from his own master. The Blade Master explained how he had been bought as a slave as a very young child by his master, and his earliest memories were of watching his master practice with the very lightsaber that Bane now held. He eventually rose up and killed his teacher in a duel, claiming the saber as his trophy, and now he passed it to Bane. This would be the lightsaber that Bane would use for the rest of his life. He carried it with him as a symbol of how he overcame his weakness. It would be the lightsaber that he used in his duel to the death with Kasim not too long after this, and it would be the same lightsaber that Bane took to his grave in his final duel with his own apprentice. The next entry is one I suspect many of you are anticipating. Darth Vectivus is not a surprising addition, especially because he's gained a reputation as the Sith that did no evil. We've discussed before how the title, while erroneous, is not entirely incorrect. Darth Vectivus was a rule of two Sith Lord, one whose story was blotted out from history. His life is only known because Lady Lumaya used it as a way to draw Jacen Solo into the dark side without guilt. The story goes that the man who would become Vectivus was a successful mining entrepreneur who served as the director of the John X Mine 811B colony. He was a shrewd and a principled businessman who discovered a dark side nexus and an energy that lay beneath one of his precious mines. The nexus granted visions to those who were force sensitive and drove mad those that were not. As it began negatively influencing his employees, Vectivus shut down his mining colony and paid hush money to anyone involved. He then sought out a Sith Master in order to teach him about the Force, and when he returned, he began to study the Nexus out of pure curiosity. Although he was a Dark Lord of the Order of the Sith, he continued to exercise self-discipline. The dark side is an energy that entices all into doing evil for the sake of power, so Vectivus kept himself grounded by continuing to practice his pre-existing code of ethics. Because of this, it was said that he never succumbed to the allure of evil and treated those around him fairly. He would return to the mining business eventually, keeping his life as a Sith Lord under wraps, and would die surrounded by friends and family. It's been speculated that this story was embellished by Lumaya in order to make the dark side sound appealing to Jacen. There are parts of this story though that we have already called into question before, such as if he were a Banite Sith at all, then he would have had to train an apprentice who would rise up and challenge him. So we aren't so sure if he truly did die peacefully. However, there is evidence to support most of the facts, one such being Vectivus' holocron. Most Sith treated it as a worthless piece of trash, and one of the future Sith Lords even gifted it as an insult to someone else. Vectivus had used his holocron more like a personal computer, and it largely contained business ledgers. However, buried deep in its files was the secret to the one thing that we know best about him, the Force Phantom technique. This was the art of taking the life essence of a living creature and then forming it into a phantasm under the control of the wielder. The technique did not harm the creature whose life essence was being used, but it would if the phantom were harmed or destroyed. This was the lost art created only by Vectivus. But although we've talked about several Sith who were nice on the surface, few of them actually made lasting change in the galaxy. It feels like only the ruthless were able to do something to impact history on a large scale. But the person in our final entry was a Sith who did palpable good for the galaxy, even if he wasn't outwardly friendly. Those who knew Darth Marr wouldn't exactly describe him as kind. In the Dark Council, where seats changed regularly due to backstabbing, Marr was the member who had been there the longest. No one was able to ever undermine him, and all feared him greatly. Darth Marr was mysterious, never having shown his face, but frequently showed his power. In the absence of the Emperor's voice, he was the one who directed most of the Dark Council's meetings. Anytime Darth Marr spoke, his tone hushed all other Sith Lords as he delivered his incredibly blunt wisdom. Marr inspired fear in all and commanded the utmost of respect. So why do we have him on our list? Darth Marr only ever had one goal: the betterment of the Empire. He was the most selfless and patriotic Sith of the entire era. Most Dark Lords are out for their own conquest and interests, but Marr's only interest was the prosperity of the Empire. He was loyal to the welfare of his people, and fought to impose an institution that he believed brought order and stability truthfully. Darth Marr despised the quabbling and political games that his fellow council members often indulged in. He was aggravated at their short-sightedness. This was the reason why he subjugated them so fiercely. The difference with this man, though, was that he had no loyalty to Emperor Vitiate. It wasn't as though he was a blind sheep following his godlike leader. Rather, Darth Marr's desire lay only in making a prosperous future for the galaxy, and he was willing to do anything to make that happen, including rebelling against his emperor and fighting side by side with the Jedi. Darth Marr is famous for having joined forces with Grandmaster Satele Shan on multiple occasions. In his life, he agreed to a ceasefire between their armies when the resurrected Revan was going on a rampage. Marr quickly discovered that their forces had been pitted against each other to distract from Revan's sinister plan of reviving Vitiate. After having discovered that their emperor was a madman, Darth Marr was not too keen on him coming back from the dead. So he met on neutral ground with Satele and formulated a plan to stop him. Under Marr's direction, Jedi and Sith stood shoulder to shoulder against a common enemy that would destroy all of their futures. And when Vitiate came back as Valkorion, Darth Marr refused to kneel. Instead, he took his life into his own hands and attacked the Emperor. Unfortunately, this was his end, as Valkorion unleashed his strongest blast of Force lightning in order to kill the Sith once and for all. But this was not the end of Marr's story. Because of his selflessness and his desire to see the galaxy brought to betterment, he was actually able to manifest as a Force ghost. He then communed with Satil Shan yet again, participating post-mortem in the plans against Valkorion. Darth Marr proved in the end that he didn't have to feign friendliness to have a good heart and a good soul deep down, even as one of the most powerful Sith Lords of the era. And this, my friends, was our picks for the kindest Sith Lords in Star Wars history. Tell us, was this something that you ever considered before? And did we skip someone who you think should have been mentioned? It's always really fun to cover these things that are not often talked about with the Jedi and Sith in the lore. And soon, we'll do a similar one, but this time we'll talk about the worst Jedi in history. If that sounds good to you, then be sure to let us know down below. And until then, may the Force be with you, and have an amazing day.